Eurojank, a genre of sorts to describe a number of ambitious European RPGs who don't quite have the budget to match their ideas. The name implies varying degrees of diamonds and varying degrees of rough. Two big names in this genre include Spiders and Piranha Bytes. The former are responsible for Greedfall, a widely acclaimed RPG whose jankiness is in dispute. But before they made Greedfall, they clearly played The Witcher and clearly watched some Game of Thrones, and made themselves a Eurojank game known as Bound by Flame. It's available on Steam, Xbox 360/1, and PlayStations 3 and 4. I'm playing the PlayStation 4 version of the game. It's probably not great, but let's see how Spider starts off their gaming careers. This isn't a review, this is a journey. Let me tell you about the Quartermuncher experience. Developed by Spiders, Bound by Flame was a mid-budget action RPG released in 2014. It was made with the Silk engine with a heavy focus on player choice, a dark fantasy setting, and, I won't call it a unique twist, but the protagonist here is partially possessed by a demon, forcing a moral tug-of-war throughout the story and giving it a bit of spice. Verdiel was a once vibrant world, now in the later stages of magical apocalypse. The 7 Ice Lords were once mortal sorcerers who turned themselves into immortal tyrants. Resistance is scarce and humans are on the brink of extinction. Ancient magic, demonic powers, and elemental forces shape the lore within Bound by Flame. Much of the world building is environmental and done through codex entries. You play as the default named Vulcan, a mercenary turned host to a demon whose companions include, a knight, an elven mage, a witch. Pretty basic companions for an RPG. They're not particularly defined individuals. Bound by Flame lacks large explorable cities, but does have smaller hub-like areas that are more linear. One example of them is Valvanor, a ruined stronghold turned resistance base. There's a couple other areas where vendors and side quests converge, but that's about it. As far as dungeon goes, most of the game takes place in labyrinthian ruins, caverns, stronghold, and fortress interiors. They're fairly linear with some optional paths, some side quests, mini-boss items, etc. The atmosphere is strong, but due to some asset variety, they can be feeling somewhat repetitive alongside, repetitive combat. As far as the story in Bound by Flame goes, the narrative is centered around your internal struggle. Embrace the fire demon for power or retain your humanity at the cost of strength. The story follows Vulcan's journey from grunt to savior, interacting with various factions, battling the Ice Lord, and ultimately making choices. Despite how that all sounds, there's a lot more telling in that sentence than what the game actually is capable of. Bound by Flame is a third-person action RPG with real-time combat. You can choose between 3 skill trees: Warrior with heavy weapons, Ranger with dual daggers and stealth, and Pyromancer for demonic fire-based powers. The system encourages switching between them, but it can feel a bit stiff, especially when going between Ranger and Warrior. Upon leveling up, you earn skill points for tree upgrades and attribute upgrades. Bound by Flame focuses on fast-paced action with dodging, parrying, and strategic use of skills. Companion AI is minimal and not particularly great, and boss fights are a bit janky. Quests and side quests are fairly limited, but include companion missions, monster hunt, and lore-focused tasks. You navigate through these labyrinth dungeons and either find monsters or your next destination with the next cutscene. Fairly basic stuff. Bound by Flame is gritty, stylized fantasy, obviously inspired by Game of Thrones. Environments are moody and bleak, ranging from icy wastelands to corrupted forests, ruined fortresses, and all the usual jazz. Character models are serviceable but somewhat stiff. The game does use its AA budget surprisingly far, but it does lack a bit of polish. The UI is workable, combat feedback is not always clear, voice acting and dialogue sequences are functional but they are not flashy. Overall, the game works. It's not great, but it does function. The soundtrack, composed by Olivier de Ribière, who also ended up doing Greedfall in the future, his career, at least here, starts off very effective. The soundtrack is haunting and dark, which, fits the atmosphere of Bound by Flame. Not too much surprise. Technically speaking, the game originally released on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 and uses those systems as a baseline. I am playing the PlayStation 4 version, so the performance is stable. I don't know how it functions on the lesser systems, but I'm going to expect that jank remains. During my playthrough of Bound by Flame, I attempted to use a rogue build. I mostly used the fire spell to enchant my daggers to set them on fire to mow through enemies at an appropriate speed. That's just how I like to play. The regular sword build was a bit too slow for my tastes. One game like this that I have to recommend, it's certainly janky and apparently not quite Euro, but there's a Game of Thrones RPG just titled Game of Thrones, developed by Cyanide, that plays quite like Dragon Age, where you play as two different protagonists who cross over with some of the show's actors' characters, but they're not particularly canon. It hasn't aged particularly well, but it does tickle a certain Game of Thrones itch that this game attempts to scratch as well. The best part of Bound by Flame is actually getting a Eurojank game. It is exactly what it says on the tin. The definition of one that is great, janky, and great. It attempts a BioWare-esque narrative with about half the budget and a quarter of the polish. This game is not great, but it shows off what spiders could eventually do if you gave them half the budget. However, the worst part of Bound by Flame is the point of no return in the final dungeon. I will note, this is one of those games I did not actually beat. I got to that area of the game and the final boss, I died, I went to go back to grind up, get some better equipment, yada yada. The boss was kind of janky, I made a save right before it. My backup save is about, I'd have to replay half the game to get back there. Yes, it's on me, I understand that, but how many RPGs do that? I got far enough, so I'm not too cheesed off, but still, the fact that it's there is the worst part of the game. Alrighty, by the numbers for Bound by Flames, my character used 2 daggers across 3 skill trees. The whole game took me about 10 hours. They only addressed 2 of 7 Ice Lords, and because this game released around 2014, quality-wise, it's around 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. Alright, well that's it for today's Quartermuncher experience. Till next time, ta-ta!